today's special occasion, we're going to dive into the fascinating world of neurons and the cardiac cycle through a shocking case.
Have you guys ever wondered how in movies people use those defibrillators to restore a normal heartbeat to a person who's nearing death? What we're going to discuss will not be specifically about defibrillators, but ICDs, which we'll discover later on. Essentially, these two share the same mechanisms, and hopefully, this video will help you understand better how these shocks to the heart can help a person survive.
First of all, let's get into the heart. Have you guys ever wondered how a person's heart can keep on pumping despite being brain dead? We're going to understand more about the mechanism of the pumping of the heart to better understand that.
Since the heart is a muscular organ responsible for pumping blood throughout our body, our blood flows in a specific cycle. It enters the heart through our superior vena cava and is pumped into the lungs for oxygenation, and then is sent out to the rest of the body through aorta. This pumping action is crucially supported by the beats of the heart, which are produced by electrical impulse generated within the heart itself. This impulse causes the heart muscle to contract and pump blood effectively.
But then you might be wondering, how is the heart generating its own heartbeat? The answer is neurons.
Let's recall what we have learned about resting potential and action potential before diving into how our heart beats.
At rest, where action is not sending any signals, sodium ions are more concentrated outside the neuron, while potassium ions are more concentrated inside. This creates a chemical gradient, and the resting membrane potential is approximately minus 70 millivolts, indicating that the inside of the cell is less positive than the outside. The tiny shock can trigger a gradient potential. Most of this can only trigger an action potential if the stimulus is strong enough to reach the threshold level, which is minus 55 millivolts. Once the threshold is achieved, voltage-gated sodium channel will open, allowing sodium ions to rush into the cell, making the inside more positive. This is called depolarization. After depolarization, potassium channels open, allowing potassium ions to exit, which restore the negative charge inside the cell. This is called as repolarization, where the membrane potential will go back until minus 70 millivolt, and at this point, the potassium ion channel are supposed to close, but it took some time for this channel to close, causing the membrane potential to reach below minus 70 millivolt, called as hyperpolarization. Now, after this point, the potassium channel will close. Then the sodium-potassium pump will work by pumping 3 sodium ions out and 2 potassium ion in, restoring the original condition of the cell.
Interestingly, did you guys know that our heart can create its own electrical impulses without needing signals from the brain? This is thanks to a group of cells known as the sinoatrial node, or the SAN, and this is often referred to as our natural pacemaker.
Now, let's zoom in on an electrocardiogram or ECG. An ECG records the electrical activity of the heart and helps us monitor its rhythm. But how are these ECG waves created? This is where we will use our knowledge of neurons depolarization wave, and repolarization so that we can understand the concept better. In the SA node, there are a lot of neuron-like cardiac muscle cells, which is why we can portray them resemblant to how we portray the depolarization wave, and repolarization in neurons. Firstly, potassium ions are normally concentrated inside the cell, and sodium, also calcium ions, outside the cell. But don't worry about that, because we're gonna discuss it later. Now, we also must remember that our neuron is more permeable to potassium ions than it is for sodium ions. But different from our neuron, these cardiac muscle cells are more permeable to sodium ions than it is for potassium ions, meaning sodium ions are easier to move across the membrane than it is for potassium ions. Now, since there's a high conductance for sodium ions in the cell, the sodium ions will start moving down the concentration gradient and enter into the cell. As positively charged sodium ions enters into the cell will become more positive. And once it reaches minus 40 millivolts, it opens calcium voltage gated channel that will make calcium ions rushes inside and making the membrane potential become more positive, which we call this condition as depolarization of the ventricles. As calcium has positive 2 charge, the increase in membrane potential will be much more steeper than it is when sodium ions join in. Calcium ions will join in until the membrane potential reaches plus 10 millivolts, where it will open another voltage-gated ion channel, but for potassium ions. This will make potassium ions, which was concentrated inside the cell, to rush out of the cell, decreasing the membrane potential and called as repolarization of the ventricle. And remember, as potassium ions is only charged with +1, the decrease will not be as steep as the increase by calcium ions. So now, there are much more calcium and sodium ions left inside the cell. So you might be wondering, if there are a lot of them inside the cell, how can the system works? But don't worry, cause they also contain a certain pump and exchange channel for sodium, potassium, and calcium ions to restore its original state. So now the cycle continues, sodium in, calcium in, potassium out, and then the pump works, sodium in, calcium in, potassium out. Then you might be wondering again, how does the impulse flow throughout our heart and help our heart to pump the blood? Now, we should go back to our understanding about depolarization wave in the axon in our neuron cell. And it goes the same for our heart. The depolarization cycle and repolarization cycle will flow from the SA node to the AV node to the bundle of His Purkinje tissue and throughout all of the parts of our heart. This system works without our brain's signal to help our heart pump blood all over our body. And also the one who creates the waves on an ECG. But what if our heartbeat becomes irregular? This condition is known as arrhythmia, and there are 2 main types of arrhythmia. First is tachycardia, where the heart beats too fast and can lead to blood clots, also increasing the risk of stroke. Second is bradycardia, where this occurs when the heart beats too slowly, potentially leading to insufficient oxygen supply to the brain and body, causing fatigue and also dizziness.
But what if our heartbeat becomes irregular? This condition is known as arrhythmia. There are 2 main types. Tachycardia, this is when the heart beats too fast, which can be seen on the most right, which can lead to blood clots and increase the risk of stroke, or bradycardia on the middle, and this occurs when the heart beats too slowly, potentially leading to insufficient oxygen supply to the brain and body, causing fatigue and dizziness. Sometimes arrhythmias can be even more complex, like atrial or ventricular fibrillation, where the heartbeat becomes chaotic. These issues can originate from problems in various parts of the heart's electrical system, including the SAN, atrioventricular node or the AVN, or even within the His Purkinje network. To address these irregularities in heartbeat, medical technology offers solutions like an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD. An ICD monitors your heart's rhythm and can deliver shocks if it detects dangerous arrhythmias, helping restore a normal heartbeat. When the ICD detects an abnormal heartbeat, it responds in several ways. For slow rhythms, or bradycardia, it acts like a pacemaker by sending small electrical signals to restore a normal rate. If it detects a fast rhythm, or tachycardia, it may deliver a mild shock called cardioversion to reset your heartbeat. In cases of life-threatening arrhythmias like ventricular fibrillation, it delivers a stronger shock to stop this dangerous rhythm and allow your heart to return to normal. The underlying mechanism is that these shocks disrupt the abnormal electrical circuits, causing the arrhythmia, allowing the heart's natural pacemaker, the sinoatrial node, to take over and restore a regular heartbeat. By doing so, ICDs play a critical role in preventing sudden cardiac arrest and improving survival rates for individuals at high risk of dangerous arrhythmia.
In summary, understanding how neurons communicate to each other highlight their essential roles on maintaining our heart rhythms.
Both systems work seamlessly to keep us alive and well. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new with us. Thank you and see you next time. The end! Yay!